What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Zero Lab. Today, we're taking a look at the best decks for tournaments in Pokemon TCG Pocket right now. We're going to take a look at 12 different decks, all of their matchup spreads, and how they are ranking right now in the TCG Pocket meta based on online tournament results from the last 2 weeks. Special shout out here to PokeHive on Twitter or X, thanks to PokeHive TCG at Poke_Hive for compiling this data on X. Starting out here with number 12, we have Marowak EX Sandslash. We'll take a look at the matchup spread for these decks, and then we'll take a look at a sample deck list. But starting out with Marowak, we have about 3.1% representation in the meta from this deck. It's got a 43.83% win rate. So this is number 12. Obviously, we're going to go from worst to best here. Looking at its matchup spread, one of the things this deck has going for it is it has a pretty good Pikachu matchup. If you look here, two of its best matchups are Pikachu EX Electrode and Pikachu EX Raichu. Both of those matchups at over 50% win rate. It's also got a very good matchup into Arbok Weezing, which has been picking up a little bit of steam recently. 70% win rate into the Arbok deck. Problem is, as we go lower down the list, we see that it is really not doing great into things like Mewtwo EX Gardevoir, Starmie EX Articuno EX, or just the regular Articuno EX. Looking at those win rates, we're at 30%, 34% in under on those win rates, and those are some of the better decks in the format as well. The other thing to note is it doesn't have as good of a Pikachu Zapdos matchup as it has into the other Pikachu EX decks. And Pikachu EX Zapdos is the best way to play Pikachu, it seems right now, and probably has the highest share of the Pikachu decks. So Marowak with that Sandslash, pretty good into a couple of decks, but coming in at number 12 because of its weakness into a wider variety of top tier decks. Here's a sample deck list, though, for Marowak. Playing a 2-2 Marowak line, a 2-2 Sandslash line, and then that Hitmonlee actually has a very good attack for 1 fighting energy. This attack does 30 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. That's like the Zebstrika that some people are playing in the Pikachu EX decks, except it's on a basic, so a very strong attack there. One thing to note about Marowak, we did just get the new promo Mankey, which is a strong fighting type. The Primeape also has a really good fighting type attack. And maybe with that new promo Mankey, we could see that line replace the Sandslash line in here, and perhaps that could make this deck a little bit better. Moving on to number 11 here, we have Venusaur EX with Executor EX. This has had a 2.7% representation in the online meta with a 44% win rate. Taking a look at some of the matchups here, again, it's got a very good Arbok Weezing matchup, just like the Marowak deck had. It's got a very good matchup into Marowak, and then it's favored into Pikachu EX Electrode and about even into Pikachu EX Raichu. And that's where its good matchups start to cut off. Going down further into this list at the bottom, we see that the fire type matchups are very bad for it. The Ninetales Rapidash deck as well as the Charizard EX deck are its worst two matchups. But it's also having a tough time into the water decks. The Articuno and the Starmies, all of those are at a 33% win rate or lower. So Venusaur EX may be good into the more rogue tier decks that aren't doing as much damage because it's kind of tanking and healing. But when you get into those fire type matchups or those other matchups that can sort of spread damage around and do consistent, pretty fast damage like the water type decks, it gets into a little bit of trouble. But taking a look at an example deck list here, we have a 2-2-2 Venusaur line, a 2-2 Executor line, 2 Ericas in here for that healing, and then the rest of the trainers there. One thing to note, there's a few other ways to play Venusaur EX. Venusaur EX could be played with that Lilligant to power it up a little bit more quickly, perhaps. Maybe you would find a space for potions in here as well to do additional healing. But Venusaur here coming in at number 11 for us today. Looking at our number 10 list here then is Arbok Weezing. Arbok Weezing is a one prize deck usually isn't playing any EXs, and it is all about that dark type. Right now, it's got about 2.5% representation in the TCG Pocket online meta with a win rate of about 47%. One of the best matchups for this deck is Mewtwo EX Gardevoir, obviously hitting for type weakness into the Mewtwo's and the Gardevoirs is very strong. It's also seeming to have a good or even matchup into Articuno and Charizard, but that is sort of where this deck falls off. Really tough matchups into all the Pikachu variants, bad matchup into Venusaur and Marowak, and not a great matchup into the Starmie decks either. So, yeah, I think this is a really cool deck. But unfortunately, it just is not good into the Pikachus. That is definitely a problem when Pikachu is so high in the meta right now. Taking a look at an example list for Arbok Weezing, we've got a 2/2 Arbok line. It's got that corner attack that during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. That's really cool because we're also utilizing the Gas Leak ability on the Weezing. This says once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may make your opponent's active Pokemon poisoned. So we can poison our opponent's Pokemon, then Koga up that Weezing, attack with Arbok, trap them in the active so they can't retreat out of that poison. We also have the Muck in here for 3 energy. It has the Venoshock attack. If your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 50 more damage. So doing 120 to a poisoned Pokemon is pretty good, but pretty difficult to get up to that 3 energy needed to attack with that Muck. Moving on to our number 9 deck, we've got the Ninetales Rapidash deck. This deck is picking a little bit of steam. It is again one of those non-EX decks, so your opponent's going to have to take 3 prizes to win that matchup. 3.1% representation, 48.63% win rate right now for the Ninetales Rapidash deck. And take a look at its matchups. The Venusaur EX Executor deck, as well as the Arbok Weezing, are 2 of its best matchups. So hitting for that type weakness against Venusaur is very strong. It looks like it's got a pretty even matchup into Pikachu Electrode, Mewtwo Gardevoir, and Pikachu Raichu, and then that's where the matchups start to fall off. It's got 40-60 matchup into Pikachu Zapdos, and then it seems like it's pretty bad into the water type decks, the Starmies and the Articunos. So, yeah, I think having a bad matchup into the water type decks is pretty tough because aside from Pikachu, those are probably the second or third best decks in the game right now. But we'll take a look at an example deck list for the Ninetales Rapidash deck. A 2/2 Ninetales line in here. Obviously, that Ninetales has the Flamethrower attack for 2 fire energy. Discard a fire energy from this Pokemon and you do 90 damage. You combine that with the Blaine Supporter that allows your Ninetales or Rapidash or Magmar to do plus 30 on this turn, and you can hit for 120 with Flamethrower. Then we have the Rapidash for 1 fire energy, has that Fire Main attack for 40 damage, plus 30 from Blaine, could do 70. And then a 1 Magmar in here with that Magma Punch can do 80 when you combine it with the Blaine. Moving on to our number 8 deck, this is Pikachu Electrode. Pikachu Electrode, just another way to play Pikachu EX. This version of the deck has 3.3% representation and a 49% win rate right now. Best matchups it's got is the Arbok Weezing, the Starmie decks, Starmie Articuno and Starmie Greninja, as well as Charizard. It is looking favored into. That's where the matchup spread sort of falls off for it. Unfavored into Ninetales Rapidash, which we just looked at, unfavored into Mewtwo Gardevoir, and unfavored into the main way to play Pikachu, which is that Pikachu Zapdos. Then it's got a pretty abysmal Pikachu Raichu matchup, as well as a bad Venusaur matchup. So another cool way to play Pikachu, but certainly not the best way to play Pikachu that we have on this list. Taking a look at the deck list, though, for now, 2/1 Raichu line, a 2/2 Electrode line, and 2 Pikachu EX and 1 Zapdos EX. Obviously playing that Lieutenant Surge to move all of your lightning energy from your bench Pokemon to your active Raichu, Electrode, or Electabuzz. So you can move some energies around, maybe hit for some big numbers with that Thunderbolt on the Raichu. But I think there are better ways to play Pikachu EX. Moving on to our number 7 deck, then we have Mewtwo EX Gardevoir. This has a 23% representation, so very high meta share in the online tournament sphere right now, boasting almost a 50% win rate. So we're getting up there on our win rates, but a couple of rough matchups here. Obviously favored, though, into the fighting type decks, favored into Pikachu Electrode, favored into Venusaur, and that's sort of where we start to fall off unfavored into some of the more popular Pikachu decks, unfavored into things like Charizard, and then unfavored into the water type decks, as well as that dark type Arbok Weezing deck coming in as its worst matchup. Um, I think that Mewtwo is potentially stronger than some of this data suggests. Some of those matchups, until we get to the bottom, all of those matchups from Ninetales to Starmie are in the 40% win rate column. And I think all of those can come up a bit when you're drawing a little bit better with the Mewtwo. Finding those Gardevoirs and Curlias early to start evolving so that you can accelerate that energy is really important for the deck. And when you can't do that, you have those slow starts and you can't really hang with the faster, more aggressive decks like the Water decks and the Lightning decks. I think that if we saw some sort of evolution search, something I talk about a lot on the channel, would love to see in the game, it would help decks like Mewtwo certainly compete better with those more basic type decks. But taking a look at an example deck list here, a 2/2/2 Gardevoir line. Gardevoir obviously has that Psy Shadow ability that once during your turn you may take a Psychic Energy from your Energy Zone and attach it to the Psychic Pokemon in the active spot. Then a Mewtwo EX, two Mewtwo EXs that Psy Drive attack for 4 energy does 150, and then you discard 2 Psychic Energy from it, so you can just reload it again with the Gardevoir. And then this version that we're sharing here has a 1/1 Jinx and Kangaskhan line in here, just some good one prize attackers, although I'm not necessarily sure that's the best way to play the deck. I think I would probably throw some Giovanni's in here, potentially over those 2 cards, and just stick with the Ralts line and the Mewtwo line in here. But that is Mewtwo EX. Moving on to our number 6 deck, we have Charizard EX. Charizard boasting 8.9% representation in the meta with an over 50% win rate. Obviously, its best matchup is that grass type matchup with the Venusaur Executor. But then a favorite into Mewtwo Gardevoir, which is obviously a great thing to be favored into, as we saw that the Mewtwo has over a 20% representation in the online meta. Good matchups into the Marowak deck as well as the Ninetales, and an even matchup into the Arbok Weezing deck, and that's sort of where the matchups fall off as we start looking into those fast, aggressive water type and lightning type decks. The lightning type decks hitting for weakness into your Moltres for the Charizard, and then obviously the water types hitting for weakness on those Charizards can make things pretty tough for the Charizard deck. So having a bad matchup into basically the water type and the electric type decks, but being favored into everything else puts you basically at that 50% win rate, because you're unfavored into sort of the best decks in the meta, but you're favored into all of the rogue type decks in the meta. Taking a look at an example deck list then for Charizard, we have a 2/2/2 Charizard line, 2 Moltres, and then the rest of the trainers there. Obviously the Moltres utilizing that Inferno Dance early to power up your Charmanders, Charmeleons, and Charizards. Flip 3 coins, take any amount or take an amount of fire energy from your energy zone equal to the number of heads, and attach it to your bench of fire Pokemon in any way you like. So utilizing that Inferno Dance attack early on in the game to power up your Pokemon, and then Charizard, when it's fully powered up, has that Crimson Storm attack that can deal 200 damage in 1 hit KO anything in the game right now. Moving on to our number 5 deck, we have Starmie EX Greninja, and this has only 1.4% representation in the meta right now, but it does have a 53% win rate. Maybe that win rate would change if we saw a little bit more representation. Maybe there's not quite enough matchup information for this archetype right now, but looking at this, it's got very good numbers into everything except the Pikachu decks. 100% win rate into Arbok Weezing right now, good matchup into Venusaur, good matchup into Articuno, good matchup into Charizard and Ninetales, good matchup into Mewtwo. Where it starts to fall off is when we hit those Pikachu decks. Obviously the Pikachus are very fast and consistent, and they're also hitting us for weakness. So those are going to be tough for Starmie. But taking a look at an example deck list here, we have a 2/2 Starmie EX line. It's got that Hydro Splash attack for 90 for only 2 water energies, and then it has that free retreat as well. And given that we are such an economical attacker, needing only 2 energies to attack, don't need to play any Misties in the deck. We got a 2/2/2 Greninja line with that Water Shuriken ability on the Greninja. Once during your turn, you may do 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So additional damage spread from that Greninja. Then we've also got some basic attackers in here in that Farfetch'd and Kangaskhan for the early game. So I think this is an archetype that maybe requires a little bit more exploration, as it does seem pretty good. But again, one of the problems that decks like this have is finding your evolutions quickly enough to really get use out of that Greninja. If you could really be using 1 to 2 Greninja by like turn 6 or 7 of the game, um, something like this would be a lot stronger. But finding those Frogadiers early enough and then finding your Greninjas to evolve after that can be pretty tough. Moving on to our number 4 here, we have Articuno EX. This has 2.2% representation into the meta and a 53.5% win rate. Looks like it has good matchups into the Fire decks, good matchups into Marowak, EX Sandslash, good matchups into Venusaur, and slightly favored into Mewtwo. Where it starts to fall off again is those Pikachu decks, and even the Starmie decks seem to be a problem for Articuno. So taking a look at the deck list, this is just the version of Articuno where you're literally just playing 2 Articuno, 2 Misty, and all of these trainers, and just powering up 2 Articuno EXs to try to win the game quickly. I don't think this is the best way to play Articuno EX, and I think the data bears that out, but it is kind of fun to just say, hey, I'm going to take 2 Articuno EXs and a bunch of trainers and see how I can do. But our number 3 deck here, I think, is a much better way to play the deck, and it is Starmie EX with Articuno EX. It's got 4.1% representation and a 54.5% win rate into the meta right now. Has similar matchup spread to the Articuno deck. However, it's a little bit better into kind of everything that the Articuno was playing against. Again, where it falls off is those lightning type decks hitting us for weakness and hitting us just as fast as we're hitting back, or even faster. And that can be really tough for these water decks, those Pikachu decks. As we've seen for a lot of the decks we've been looking at, I don't think we're going to be surprised by what the number 1 deck on here is, as we keep talking about how strong Pikachu EX is. But looking at the deck list here, we've got a 2-2 Starmie line with 2 Articuno EXs. So basically subbing out those extra trainers we had in just the Articuno deck and replacing those trainers with the Starmie EX line. And I think that's good. The Starmie EX is a good attacker. Hitting for 90 is great for just 2 energies, and having that for your tree is also very strong. Moving on to our number 2 deck, we have Pikachu EX with Raichu. This has about 3% representation in the online meta with a 56% win rate. And this deck looks really strong by the data we have right now, favored into everything, all the way down to Mewtwo EX Gardevoir on this list, then even into the Ninetales and Venusaur deck, and then just slightly, barely unfavored into Pikachu EX, Zapdos EX, as well as that Marowak deck. This deck is looking very strong. Just look at the amount of green on this slide here. Great performance from this deck overall so far. What can you say? The lightning type is the strongest type in TCG Pocket right now. But just take a little bit closer look at some of this data. Being favored into all of the water type decks, those take up a large portion of the meta, and then slightly favored into Mewtwo, Gardevoir, which we saw has had the highest meta share so far of the decks we've looked at, in that over 20% meta share. So this deck is looking really strong, and we'll take a look at an example deck list here. Got that 2-2 Magneton line in here. It has that Volt Charge ability that once during your turn, you may take a lightning energy from your energy zone and attach it to this Pokemon. Then we've got a 2-2 Raichu in here. That Raichu has the Thunderbolt attack for 140, and you discard all energy from this Pokemon. So that is one-shotting pretty much all stage basic and stage 1 EXs in the game right now. We've got the Lieutenant Surge to sort of synergize between the Magneton and the Raichu. The Lieutenant Surge moves all lightning energy from your bench Pokemon to your active Raichu. So you can load up energy with that Volt Charge ability on the Magneton and then move it all with that Lieutenant Surge to the Raichu. And then we round out the deck list with 2 Pikachu EXs. Obviously, Circle Circuit, still a great attack, and that Zapdos EX. So this seems like, well, it's the second strongest deck right now on this list that we have. And then moving on to number 1, we've got Pikachu EX, Zapdos EX, and look at that meta share. 15%, just slightly lower than the Mewtwo Gardevoir one. But if we combined all the Pikachus together, it would certainly be higher than the Mewtwo meta share. But this is seeming to be the best way to play Pikachu EX with a 62.5% win rate. And look at all the green here. There's only one matchup where it is basically even. Otherwise, everything else here is favored for Pikachu EX, Zapdos EX, and that matchup is the second place deck, Pikachu EX, with that Raichu is basically an even matchup here, but everything else is favored for Pikachu. Favored into Starmie, Articuno, favored into Charizard, favored into Marowak, favored into Mewtwo. This deck is just great right now in TCG Pocket, and if you're hoping to counter it, well, bad news for you. It looks like it's favored into almost everything. Maybe there is a rogue deck out there that we can build that can have a really, really strong Pikachu Zapdos matchup. Maybe that Primate with the new Mankey is a potentiality. But right now, Pikachu EX with Zapdos EX is the strongest deck in the game, no question about it. And we have plenty of data to show that. Now, taking a look at a deck list, this deck list is the one that won the first biggest TCG Pocket tournament with $300 in cash prizing. It's got the 2/2 Zeb Strike line in there with that Thunder Spear attack for 1 lightning. This attack does 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, so that's a way to target down some benched Pokemon. 2 Zapdos EX, 2 Pikachu EX, 2 Pincurchin with that Thunder Shock attack, doing 30 for 2 lightning energies, and then flip a coin if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. I think this is the strongest way to play Pikachu right now. I think there could be an argument to cut down a little bit on the Pincurchin, maybe add a potion or something. Or just another Giovanni. I don't know that we need this many Pokemon in the deck, although the Pincurchins of Paralysis, if we get just a little bit behind, can sometimes save us in games. But this deck is super duper strong, and yeah, if you want to be playing it, you better be opening up those Pikachu packs, pulling your Zapdos and Pikachu. So this is kind of a rounding out of the best decks in TCG Pocket right now. Big thanks to PokeHive TCG for compiling all of this data over on X. Go give them a follow. If you like our content and what we're doing here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.